The morning sun was just starting to peek through the Los Angeles smog when Keanu Reeves pulled his motorcycle into a small parking lot. He wasn't headed to some fancy restaurant or trendy cafe. Instead, he found himself in front of a little diner that looked like it had been there since the 1960s. The paint was chipping off the walls, and the neon sign that probably once glowed bright red now flickered weakly, barely spelling out the word diner. Keanu had driven past this place 100 times before, always on his way to somewhere else. But today was different. He was early for a meeting across town, and something about this old place called out to him. Maybe it was the simple, honest look of it, or maybe he was just tired of the usual spots where people recognized him and made a fuss. Here, he thought, he could just be another person grabbing breakfast. The bell above the door made a tired, jingling sound as he stepped inside. The place was nearly empty. Just 2 truckers sitting at the counter, hunched over their coffee cups, and an elderly man in the corner booth reading a newspaper that looked a few days old. The air smelled like coffee, bacon grease, and something else. The kind of worn-in smell that old buildings get, like memories baked into the walls. Keanu chose a booth near the window and sat down. The vinyl seat cracked under his weight, and he noticed the table had scratches and cigarette burns from decades past. He didn't mind. There was something real about this place, something that reminded him of simpler times. Before the fame and the cameras and the constant attention, that's when he first saw her. An elderly woman emerged from the kitchen, moving slowly and carefully like each step required thought. She wore a faded pink waitress uniform that had clearly been washed 1,000 times. The fabric was thin in places, and Keanu could see where she'd sewn patches on the pockets to keep them from tearing further. Her name tag, slightly crooked, read Dolores in handwritten letters that were starting to fade. What struck him most was how old she was. Not just old, but truly elderly. Her hair was completely white, pulled back in a neat bun. Her face was a map of wrinkles, each one telling a story of years lived. Her hands, spotted with age, trembled slightly as she held the coffee pot. She couldn't have been less than 90 years old, and here she was working in a diner at what should have been her time to rest. Dolores made her way to his table with slow, measured steps. Keanu noticed she walked with a slight limp favoring her left leg. When she reached him, she smiled, and despite everything, the tiredness in her eyes, the way she seemed to struggle just to stand, that smile was genuine and warm. "Good morning, honey," she said, her voice soft and kind. "Coffee?" "Yes, please," Keanu replied, returning her smile. Her hand shook as she poured, and a few drops spilled onto the saucer. "Oh, I'm so sorry about that," she said quickly, pulling a napkin from her apron to wipe it up. "It's perfectly fine," Keanu assured her. "Really, don't worry about it." She handed him a worn plastic menu. "Take your time looking that over. I'll be back in just a minute to take your order." As she walked away, Keanu watched her. He saw how she gripped the back of chairs as she passed them, using them for balance. He noticed how she paused for just a moment before picking up the coffee pot again to refill the truckers' cups. This wasn't someone working because they loved the job or wanted to stay active. This was someone who had to work. When Dolores returned, Keanu had decided on scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy. As she wrote down his order on a small pad, he saw how swollen her knuckles were, probably from arthritis. The pen seemed heavy in her grip. "Beautiful morning out there," Keanu said, making conversation. "Oh yes," Dolores replied, glancing toward the window. "Every morning is beautiful when you wake up to see it." "That's what I always say." "How long have you been working here?" he asked. "At this diner?" "About 3 years now," she said. "Before that I was retired for a bit." But life has a way of changing your plans, doesn't it? There was something in the way she said it, not bitter, not angry, just stating a fact, that made Keanu want to know more. But he sensed this wasn't the time to push. Dolores excused herself to put in his order, and he watched her disappear into the kitchen. While he waited, Keanu observed the diner more closely. The place was clearly struggling. Several of the booths had tears in the upholstery, patched over with duct tape. The ceiling tiles were stained from old leaks. The salt and pepper shakers on his table were nearly empty. This wasn't a business that was thriving. Dolores returned with his breakfast, carrying the plate with both hands. He could see the effort it took for her not to let it shake. When she set it down, she let out a small breath as if that simple task had exhausted her. "Can I get you anything else, honey?" she asked. Actually, if you have a minute, I'd love some company, Keanu said. That is, if your boss doesn't mind. Dolores glanced back at the kitchen, then at the nearly empty diner. I suppose a minute wouldn't hurt. My feet could use the rest. She slid into the booth across from him, and Keanu saw her wince slightly as she sat down. She folded her hands on the table, and he noticed her wedding ring, a simple gold band worn thin from years of wearing. So you said you came back to work after retiring? Keanu prompted gently. Yes, well, Dolores began, and for a moment he thought she might not continue, but then she did, her voice steady. My husband passed 5 years ago. He had cancer. Good man, my Henry, worked hard his whole life. But the medical bills, they just kept coming. Even with insurance, there was so much they didn't cover. By the time he passed, we'd gone through our savings and then some. Keanu felt his chest tighten. He stayed quiet, letting her talk. I tried to make it on Social Security alone. I really did. But my apartment rent kept going up, and my medication costs more each year. I've got a heart condition, you see. The pills keep me going, but they're not cheap. I was cutting them in half, trying to make them last longer, but my doctor said that was dangerous. She smiled sadly. So here I am. The owner here is a good man. He gave me a job when nobody else would. Said I reminded him of his mother. How many days a week do you work? Keanu asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. 6 days. Sometimes 7 if someone calls in sick. I work the morning shift, and sometimes I stay for the lunch rush if they need me. She looked down at her hands. The pay isn't much, but with tips I can usually make my rent and buy my medicine. Some months are harder than others. Keanu noticed her shoes then, peeking out from under the table. They were old sneakers, the kind meant for comfort, but they had holes near the toes. They'd been worn down so much that they barely had any sole left. Before he could say anything, one of the truckers called out for more coffee. Dolores immediately stood up, that same warm smile returning to her face. Duty calls, she said. You enjoy your breakfast, honey? As Keanu ate, he couldn't take his eyes off her. She moved from table to table, always smiling, always kind, even though every step looked painful. When someone left a tip on the counter, he saw her carefully fold the bills and tuck them into her apron pocket, as if they were precious. Because to her they were. He finished his meal, but he didn't leave. He ordered another coffee, then another, just so he could stay and watch. He saw the way she struggled to carry a tray loaded with plates. He saw her lean against the counter when she thought no one was looking, catching her breath. He saw dignity and determination in the face of a situation that wasn't fair. When Keanu finally asked for his check, Dolores brought it over. The total was $8.50. He pulled out his wallet and placed $200 bills on the table. Dolores's eyes went wide. Oh, honey, this is too much. Your meal was only— I know, Keanu said softly. The rest is for you, please. Tears welled up in her eyes. God bless you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means. But as Keanu walked out of that diner and into the bright morning sun, he realized something. That money would help her today, maybe this week. But what about next week? Next month? Next year? How many other elderly people were out there, working jobs that broke their bodies just to survive? He sat on his motorcycle for a long moment, staring at the diner. Something had shifted inside him. He couldn't walk away from this. He wouldn't. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Keanu couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Dolores. He kept seeing her worn shoes, her trembling hands, the way she had to grip the backs of chairs just to stay steady. The image of her carefully folding those dollar bills and tucking them into her apron pocket played over and over in his mind. He'd been in this business long enough to know that money could solve a lot of problems. But he also knew that throwing money at something wasn't always the answer. There had to be a better way, something more thoughtful, something that would actually make a lasting difference in her life. The next morning, Keanu found himself riding back to that same diner. He told himself he was just going for breakfast, but deep down he knew he needed to see Dolores again. He needed to understand her situation better before he could figure out how to help. The diner looked even more tired in the daylight. A few more customers filled the booths this time, but it was still far from busy. Dolores was there, of course, moving between tables with that same slow, careful pace. When she saw Keanu, her face lit up with recognition. Well, hello again, she said, making her way over to him. Back for more of our famous coffee? Something like that, Keanu smiled, sliding into the same booth he'd sat in yesterday. "How are you doing today?" "Oh, can't complain," Dolores said, though Keanu noticed she was moving even slower than before. "My arthritis is acting up a bit, but that's just part of getting old, I suppose." Over the next hour, as Dolores brought him his food and refilled his coffee, Keanu engaged her in more conversation. He learned that she lived in a neighborhood about 20 minutes away by bus. She didn't have a car anymore, had to sell it 2 years ago when she needed money for a root canal. The bus ride meant she had to leave her apartment by 5 in the morning to make it to her 6 o'clock shift. "I don't mind the early mornings," she told him. "Always been an early riser. My Henry used to joke that I was up before the roosters." But Keanu minded. He minded that a 90-year-old woman had to wake up in the dark, take a bus through parts of the city that weren't safe, and then stand on her feet for 8 hours or more. He minded that she did all this just to afford the basic necessities of life. When a younger waitress came in for the lunch shift, Keanu watched the contrast between them. The younger woman moved quickly, easily balancing multiple plates, joking with customers. She made it look effortless. Dolores, meanwhile, had to take breaks between tables, and he saw her rubbing her lower back when she thought no one was watching. Before he left, Keanu asked Dolores a question that had been bothering him. "Do you have any family around here? Anyone who could help?" Her expression grew distant. "I had a daughter," she said quietly. "She passed away about 10 years ago. Car accident. She was only 42. My son lives in Ohio with his family. He's got his own struggles, lost his job last year. I don't want to be a burden to him. He's got 3 kids to feed." "I'm sure he wouldn't see you as a burden," Keanu said gently. "Maybe not," Dolores agreed. "But I would. I raised my kids to be independent and strong. Can't very well ask them to take care of me now, can I? Besides, I'm managing. I'm still here, still working. That counts for something." Her pride was evident, and Keanu respected that. But pride didn't pay for medication. Pride didn't fix worn-out shoes or make that bus ride any safer. That afternoon, Keanu made some calls. First, he contacted his financial advisor, then his lawyer. He explained what he wanted to do, and they started putting together a plan. But Keanu knew it couldn't just be about money. He needed to understand the full scope of Dolores' situation, so he went back the next day. And the day after that, each time he learned a little more. He discovered that Dolores was diabetic on top of her heart condition. She had to check her blood sugar regularly, but the test strips were expensive, so she rationed them, checking less often than her doctor recommended. She told him this casually, as if it were no big deal. But Keanu felt his anger rising, not at her, but at a system that forced people to make such impossible choices. He learned that her apartment was in one of the roughest neighborhoods in the city. She'd been robbed twice in the past year, once right outside her building. She didn't keep anything valuable in her home anymore, because she was afraid of break-ins. The building had no security, and the landlord refused to fix anything. Her stove only had 2 working burners. Her bathroom sink leaked constantly, driving up her water bill. "But the rent is $600 a month," she explained. "Can't find anything cheaper that isn't a complete dump." And believe me, I've looked. Keanu also noticed how other customers treated her. Most were kind enough, but some were impatient, snapping at her when she moved too slowly or forgot something. He saw one man complain loudly because his coffee wasn't hot enough, even though Dolores had just poured it. She apologized profusely, her hands shaking as she poured him a fresh cup, and the man left without tipping. It took everything in Keanu not to say something. But he knew that would only embarrass Dolores, and that was the last thing he wanted. On his 4th visit, Keanu arrived to find Dolores sitting in the back booth during what should have been her shift. Her eyes were red, and she was pressing a napkin to her face. The cook, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, was covering her tables. Keanu approached carefully. "Is everything okay?" Dolores looked up, startled. She tried to compose herself quickly. "Oh, I'm fine. Just feeling a little dizzy. I'll be back on my feet in a minute." But she didn't look fine. She looked pale and exhausted. "Have you eaten today?" Keanu asked. She hesitated. "I had some toast this morning. That was hours ago. Let me get you something." No, I couldn't. I need to get back to work." Keanu gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Please, let someone take care of you for once." He went to the cook and ordered soup and a sandwich, insisting they make it quickly. When he brought it back to Dolores, she had tears in her eyes again. You're too kind, she whispered. I don't deserve this. Everyone deserves kindness, Keanu said firmly. Everyone deserves to be taken care of. As he watched her eat slowly, carefully, as if the food were something precious, Keanu made his final decision. He'd seen enough. He understood enough. It was time to act. That evening, he sat down with his lawyer and his financial advisor and laid out exactly what he wanted to do. They had concerns, of course. They wanted to make sure he was protected legally, that everything was set up properly. But Keanu was insistent. This wasn't about protecting himself. This was about changing someone's life. I want to do this right, he told them. I don't want it to be some temporary fix that runs out in a few months. I want her to have security for the rest of her life. Real security. They worked late into the night, drawing up papers, establishing trusts, making arrangements. Keanu thought about every detail. It wasn't enough just to give her money. He needed to ensure she'd have a safe place to live, that her medical needs would be covered, that she wouldn't have to worry about where her next meal was coming from. But there was something else he wanted to do. He wanted people to know about Dolores' story, not to embarrass her, but to shine a light on a problem that too many people ignored. How many elderly people were out there, working jobs that destroyed their bodies just to survive? How many were one missed paycheck away from losing everything? Keanu reached out to a videographer he'd worked with before, someone he trusted. He explained what he wanted to do and why. The videographer was immediately on board. This is important, he said. People need to see this. They planned it carefully. Keanu wanted to make sure Dolores would be comfortable, that she understood what was happening, that she had the choice to say no if she wanted. This was her story after all. He was just helping to tell it. The next morning, as Keanu rode his motorcycle back to the diner one more time, he felt nervous in a way he hadn't felt in years. He'd been in countless films, faced cameras and crowds without hesitation, but this was different. This was real life. This was someone's dignity, someone's future. He couldn't mess this up. When he walked through that door, he wasn't just Keanu Reeves, the actor. He was a person who had witnessed something wrong and decided to do something about it. And he was about to change everything for one remarkable woman who'd spent her life working hard and asking for nothing in return. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and Dolores looked up from wiping down a table. She smiled at him, that same warm smile she gave everyone, never knowing that her life was about to transform in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. It was time. Keanu knew he needed to talk to the owner of the diner before moving forward with his plan. It wouldn't be right to surprise everyone without understanding the full picture, so that afternoon he asked Dolores if the owner was around. Mr. Chen, he's in the back office doing paperwork. Want me to get him for you? If you don't mind, Keanu said. A few minutes later, a man in his 60s emerged from the kitchen. He had kind eyes but looked worn down, the way people do when they've been fighting to keep something alive for too long. When he recognized Keanu, his eyebrows shot up in surprise. I thought that was you, but I didn't want to assume, Mr. Chen stammered. What can I do for you? Keanu asked if they could talk privately, and Mr. Chen led him to a cramped office that smelled like old coffee and dust. The desk was covered in bills and invoices, and Keanu could see the stress written all over the owner's face. I want to talk to you about Dolores, Keanu began. Mr. Chen's expression immediately became defensive. Look, I know she's old, but she's a good worker. She's never late, never complains. If someone's been giving her trouble— No, nothing like that, Keanu interrupted gently. I want to help her, but I need to understand her situation better. How much do you pay her? Mr. Chen sighed heavily. Minimum wage. I wish I could pay more, I really do. But this place— He gestured around at the Warren office. We're barely breaking even most months. I've owned this diner for 30 years. Bought it from my father. But the neighborhood's changed, competition's tough, and everything costs more than it used to. I keep the lights on and pay my people, but there's nothing left over. Why did you hire her? Keanu asked. Most places wouldn't hire someone her age. Mr. Chen's expression softened. She came in here 3 years ago, filled out an application in the shakiest handwriting I'd ever. I told her I wasn't hiring, but she just stood there and said, "Oh, please, I need to work. I won't be any trouble." Something about the way she said it. He shook his head. My mother worked until she was 85, did whatever she had to do to help our family. When I looked at Dolores, I saw my mother. So I gave her a shot. And has she been good for business? The customers love her, Mr. Chen admitted. Well, most of them. She's slower than the younger staff, and sometimes she forgets orders or mixes things up. But she's got this way about her, you know? She makes people feel cared for. Some regulars come in specifically to see her, but I can't pay her more than I'm paying her now. I just can't, Keanu nodded, understanding. I'm not here to criticize you. Actually, I want to help both of you, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Mr. Chen studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Over the next 2 days, Keanu put the final pieces of his plan into place. He met with his lawyer 3 more times, making sure every detail was perfect. He called the videographer and explained exactly how he wanted things to go. Most importantly, he thought carefully about how to present this to Dolores in a way that wouldn't make her feel like charity, wouldn't strip away her dignity. He also did something else. He started researching elderly poverty in America. The numbers shocked him. Millions of seniors living below the poverty line, countless others forced to choose between medication and food, between rent and heating. People who'd worked their entire lives, contributed to society, raised families, and somehow ended up struggling just to survive in their final years. This wasn't just about Dolores anymore. This was bigger than one person, but it had to start somewhere, and it would start with her. On the morning they'd planned for the presentation, Keanu arrived at the diner before opening time. The videographer was already there, setting up cameras discreetly. Mr. Chen had agreed to open an hour late and keep the diner closed for regular customers. He'd told Dolores it was for a special event, but hadn't explained what kind. When Dolores arrived for her shift, she looked confused by all the activity. "What's going on?" she asked Mr. Chen. "Why are there cameras?" "Just go with it," he said gently, guiding her inside. "Trust me." Keanu was waiting in the main dining area. A few other people were there too. His lawyer, his financial advisor, and a couple of staff members from his team. Dolores looked overwhelmed, her eyes darting around nervously. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice small. "Am I in trouble?" "No, no trouble at all," Keanu assured her, walking over and taking her hand. "Please sit down. I need to talk to you about something important." He led her to a booth and sat across from her. The cameras were rolling, but Keanu had instructed the videographer to be as unobtrusive as possible. This moment needed to be real, not staged. "Dolores, over the past week I've gotten to know you," Keanu began. "I've learned about your life, your struggles, and your incredible strength. And I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, about working 6 days a week at 90 years old, about choosing between medication and food, about living in a place where you don't feel safe." Tears were already forming in Dolores's eyes. "I get by," she said quietly. "I don't need pity." "This isn't pity," Keanu said firmly. "This is about what's right. You've worked your entire life. You raised a family. You took care of your husband when he was sick. You've given everything you had to give. And now, when you should be resting, when you should be enjoying your time, you're standing on your feet 8 hours a day just to afford basic necessities. That's not right. That's not fair." "Life isn't fair," Dolores said, wiping her eyes. "Maybe not, but that doesn't mean we can't try to make it better." Keanu pulled out an envelope from his jacket. "I want you to open this." Dolores's hands shook as she took the envelope. She opened it carefully, pulling out a check. When she saw the amount, $50,000, she gasped and nearly dropped it. "I can't accept this," she said immediately. "This is too much. This is—" "Wait," Keanu interrupted gently. "There's more. That check is just for immediate expenses, anything you need right now. But I've also set up a trust fund in your name. It will provide you with a monthly income for the rest of your life. You'll never have to worry about rent or medication or food again." Dolores was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. No, I can't. This is too much. Why would you do this?" "Because you deserve it. Because it's the right thing to do." Keanu reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "But there's still more. I've been working with a property manager, and we've found you a new apartment. It's in a safe neighborhood with good security. The building has an elevator so you won't have to climb stairs. And it's already furnished. The rent is paid for the next year, and after that your trust fund will cover it." "I don't understand," Dolores whispered. "Why are you doing this for me?" "Because I can," Keanu said simply. "Because I saw someone who needed help and I had the ability to help. And maybe because I want people to know about your story, about what you've been through, what you've endured. There are so many people like you out there, working themselves to the bone just to survive. Maybe if people see what you've been dealing with, they'll start paying attention. They'll start caring. But I'm nobody, Dolores said, her voice breaking. I'm just an old woman. You're not nobody. You're somebody who matters. Your life matters. Your struggles matter. Keanu squeezed her hands. And I've also contacted your son in Ohio. He wants to fly out next week to see you and help you move into your new place. At this, Dolores broke down completely. Her whole body shook with sobs. Not just tears of gratitude, but years of suppressed fear and worry and exhaustion all releasing at once. Keanu moved to sit beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders while she cried. I've been so scared, she admitted between sobs. So scared of becoming homeless, of not being able to afford my medicine, of dying alone in that terrible apartment. I've been so tired and my body hurts all the time, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop working because if I did, I'd have nothing. You don't have to be scared anymore, Keanu told her. And you don't have to work anymore. You can rest now. You've earned it. Mr. Chen, watching from behind the counter, was wiping his own eyes. The lawyer, a man who dealt with money and contracts all day, had to turn away to compose himself. Everyone in that diner understood they were witnessing something profound, not just a generous act, but a moment of pure human compassion. When Dolores finally composed herself enough to speak, she looked at Keanu with an expression of wonder. How can I ever repay you? You don't need to repay me, Keanu said. Just enjoy your life. Spend time with your son and grandchildren. Do the things you've always wanted to do but never had time for. That's all the repayment I need. I don't even know what I want to do, Dolores admitted with a watery laugh. It's been so long since I thought about anything except surviving. Then you'll have time to figure it out, Keanu smiled. All the time in the world. As the cameras continued rolling, Keanu explained that they'd be sharing this video with the world, but only if she was comfortable with it. Dolores thought about it for a moment, then nodded. If my story can help somebody else, then yes, share it. People need to know that this is happening, that there are others like me out there. And just like that, everything changed. For Dolores, it was the beginning of a new chapter. One without fear, without exhaustion, without the constant weight of just trying to survive. For Keanu, it was the fulfillment of a promise he'd made to himself when he first walked out of that diner a week ago. But for the rest of the world, this moment was still to come. The video hadn't been posted yet. No one knew what had just happened in this small, struggling diner in Los Angeles. That was about to change. The video went live at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. Keanu's team had edited it carefully, keeping the most powerful moments. Dolores' tears, her disbelief, the raw emotion in her voice when she talked about being scared. They'd titled it simply, When Kindness Changes Everything. Within the first hour, it had 1,000 views. By midnight, 50,000. When Keanu woke up the next morning and checked his phone, the number had climbed to 2 million. And it wasn't slowing down. His phone started ringing nonstop. Text messages flooded in from friends, colleagues, people he hadn't talked to in years. His social media accounts exploded with notifications. Everyone wanted to talk about Dolores, about what he'd done, about how the video had made them cry. But something else was happening too. Something Keanu hadn't quite anticipated. People weren't just watching and moving on. They were sharing their own stories. A woman in Texas posted about her 87-year-old mother who worked at a grocery store, bagging groceries for minimum wage because her retirement wasn't enough. A man in Florida talked about his grandfather, who delivered newspapers at dawn, his arthritic hands struggling to fold each one. A teacher in Michigan shared photos of the 75-year-old janitor at her school, who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford his insulin. The comment section became a flood of heartbreak. Thousands upon thousands of people talking about elderly relatives, neighbors, strangers they'd seen struggling. People who'd never thought much about elderly poverty were suddenly confronting it head-on. And they were angry at a system that allowed this to happen, angry at themselves for not noticing sooner. By the end of the second day, the video had 20 million views. News outlets started picking up the story. Morning shows called, wanting interviews. But Keanu declined most of them. This wasn't about him. He did agree to one interview, though, with a journalist he trusted, someone who would keep the focus where it belonged. Why did you do it? The journalist asked him during their sit-down. Keanu thought for a moment before answering. I've been fortunate in my life, more fortunate than most people will ever be. And with that fortune comes a responsibility. When you see something wrong, when you see someone suffering and you have the power to help, I think you have to act. Not because you want praise or recognition, but because it's the human thing to do. But $50,000 plus a trust fund, plus an apartment, that's a significant commitment. It is, Keanu agreed. But what's the alternative? Walk away and let a 90-year-old woman keep working herself into the ground? Pretend I didn't see what was happening? I couldn't do that. I couldn't live with myself if I did. What do you want people to take away from this? Keanu leaned forward, his expression serious. I want people to look around. Really look. There are elderly people everywhere who are struggling, who are working jobs that are destroying their bodies because they have no other choice. And I want people to ask themselves why. Why is this happening in one of the wealthiest countries in the world? Why are people who work their entire lives being forced to choose between food and medicine? The interview was shared across every major platform. Clips of it played on news stations around the world. And suddenly the conversation wasn't just about one heartwarming act of kindness. It was about systemic failure, about how society treats its elderly, about what needs to change. Meanwhile, back at the diner, something unexpected was happening. People started showing up, not just regular customers, but people who'd seen the video and wanted to support the place where Dolores had worked. They came from all over the city, then from all over the state. The line stretched down the block. Mr. Chen was overwhelmed. He'd never seen anything like it. People weren't just coming for food, they were leaving massive tips. They were asking about the staff, wanting to make sure everyone was being paid fairly. Some left envelopes of cash with notes saying for the employees or to help keep this place running. One elderly man came in and asked to speak to Mr. Chen directly. I saw what you did, he said, hiring Dolores when no one else would. That took character. My wife and I want to help. He handed Mr. Chen a check for $10,000. Use this to fix up the place. Pay your people better. Whatever you need. Mr. Chen stood there, check in hand, unable to speak. In 1 week, his struggling diner had gone from barely surviving to having more business than he could handle, and enough money to make real improvements. Dolores, meanwhile, was adjusting to her new life. Her son had flown in from Ohio, and together they'd moved her belongings from her old apartment to the new one. She'd cried when she first saw it. A clean, bright space with new furniture, big windows that let in sunlight, and a modern kitchen where everything actually worked. Mom, you don't have to worry anymore, her son kept saying, tears in his own eyes. It's over. The struggling is over. But Dolores was having trouble accepting it. She'd spent so many years in survival mode that she didn't know how to stop. The first few mornings in her new apartment, she woke up at 5 o'clock out of habit, her body expecting to catch the bus to work. It took her a moment each time to remember that she didn't have to do that anymore. She called Keanu one afternoon, a few weeks after everything had happened. I don't know what to do with myself, she admitted. I know that sounds silly. I should be happy, and I am, but I feel lost. I've been working for so long that I don't remember how to just be. That's okay, Keanu told her gently. Give yourself time. You're learning how to live again, not just survive. That takes adjustment. I want to do something meaningful, Dolores said. Something that matters. I can't just sit around watching television all day. What matters to you? Keanu asked. Dolores thought about it. Other people. People like me. I keep thinking about all those comments on the video. All those stories about elderly people struggling. I want to help them somehow. And that's when an idea started forming. Within a month, Dolores had become an advocate. She started speaking at community centers, sharing her story and talking about the realities of elderly poverty. Local organizations invited her to board meetings. Politicians reached out, wanting to hear her perspective on senior citizen issues. She was nervous at first, standing in front of crowds, but then she'd remember all those comments, all those stories of people like her. And she'd find her voice. She'd talk about what it felt like to choose between medicine and food, about the fear of becoming homeless, about the physical pain of working when your body is begging you to rest. People listened, really listened, because Dolores wasn't some politician or activist speaking theoretically. She'd lived it. She'd been there, and her words carried weight. A nonprofit organization focused on elderly care reached out to her. They wanted her to be their spokesperson. Your story has already helped so many people, they told her. Imagine what you could do if you continued sharing it. if you helped us advocate for policy changes." Dolores accepted. For the first time in years, she felt like she had a purpose beyond just surviving. Back at the diner, Mr. Chen made changes too. He raised wages for all his employees. He hired 2 more staff members so no one had to work double shifts. He renovated the dining room, fixing the torn booths and replacing the old equipment in the kitchen. The place started thriving in a way it hadn't in decades, but he did something else too. He created a fund, using some of the donations people had sent, to help any of his employees who were struggling financially. If someone needed help with medical bills or rent, the money was there. "Dolores taught me something," he told his staff. "She taught me that people shouldn't have to choose between working here and taking care of themselves. This fund is my way of making sure no one has to make that choice." The video, meanwhile, continued to spread. It had been shared by celebrities, politicians, religious leaders, and ordinary people who were moved by what they'd seen. It sparked fundraisers for elderly assistance programs across the country. Some states began reviewing their policies on senior citizen support. Companies started programs specifically aimed at hiring elderly workers and providing them with fair wages and benefits. One retirement community in Oregon began a program where residents could work part-time if they wanted to, but with guaranteed living expenses covered regardless. A tech company in California created an initiative to match employees' donations to elderly care organizations. A grocery chain announced they'd be offering premium wages and benefits to senior employees. The ripples kept spreading, touching lives in ways that couldn't be easily measured. An elderly woman in Georgia saw the video and finally applied for assistance programs she'd been too proud to ask for. A man in Arizona reached out to his elderly neighbor and discovered she'd been skipping meals to afford her medication. He organized his neighborhood to help her. A college student started a nonprofit that connected elderly people who needed help with young volunteers who could provide it. Keanu watched all of this unfold with a sense of wonder. He'd hoped his gesture would make a difference for Dolores. He'd hoped maybe it would inspire a few people to help elderly folks in their own communities. But this was beyond anything he'd imagined. "You started something," his manager told him one day. "This isn't just a viral video anymore. It's a movement." "I didn't start it," Keanu corrected. "Dolores did. Her courage, her dignity, her willingness to share her story, that's what started this. I just helped people see what was already there." But the truth was, it took both of them, Dolores' story and Keanu's compassion, coming together at exactly the right moment. And now that spark had caught fire, spreading far beyond what either of them could have anticipated. The question now was, what would come next? Because this was just the beginning. 6 months after the video went viral, Dolores stood in front of a packed auditorium in Washington, D.C. She'd never imagined herself in a place like this, speaking to lawmakers, advocates, and journalists about elderly poverty and the need for systemic change. Her hands still shook, but now it was from nervousness rather than exhaustion and malnutrition. "I'm here today not just for myself," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm here for every person over 65 who's choosing between heating their home and buying groceries. For every senior citizen working jobs that hurt their bodies because Social Security isn't enough. For everyone who's too proud to ask for help and too tired to keep going." The room was silent, everyone hanging on her words. She told her story again, not for sympathy, but to illustrate a point. She talked about the systemic failures that had led to her situation, about how one illness or one unexpected expense could destroy decades of careful saving, about how the cost of living had skyrocketed while benefits for seniors barely budged. "I was one of the lucky ones," she said. "Someone noticed me. Someone helped." "But what about all the others? What about the millions of elderly people who don't have a Keanu Reeves walking into their workplace? They deserve dignity too. They deserve to live, not just survive." When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Several legislators approached her afterward, promising to look into policy reforms. A senator told her she'd inspired him to draft new legislation focused on elderly care and support. A representative from a major healthcare organization wanted to discuss ways to make prescription medications more affordable for seniors. It was overwhelming. But Dolores had learned something over these past months. Her voice mattered. Her experience mattered. And if she could use what had happened to her to help others, then maybe all those years of struggling had meaning beyond just survival. Meanwhile, The movement that had started with one video continued to grow. Community organizations across the country had launched initiatives specifically focused on elderly support. One particularly successful program in Seattle paired seniors who needed help with volunteers who could assist with everything from grocery shopping to home repairs to just providing companionship. A teacher in Atlanta started a project where her students adopted elderly neighbors, checking on them regularly and helping with tasks that had become difficult. The program was so successful that it spread to other schools across the state, then across the country. Young people were learning about empathy and responsibility, while elderly people were receiving the help and companionship they desperately needed. Churches, synagogues, and mosques organized support networks. Tech companies created apps that connected seniors with resources and assistance. Even small businesses got involved, offering discounts to elderly customers or creating special programs to help senior employees. The diner where Dolores had worked became something of a landmark. People still came from all over to eat there, to see the place where it all started. Mr. Chen had framed a photo of Dolores in her waitress uniform and hung it on the wall near the entrance, with a small plaque that read, "Where kindness changed the world." He'd also done something else. Inspired by what had happened, he'd started hiring more elderly workers. Not out of charity, but because he'd learned something important. Older employees brought experience, reliability, and a work ethic that was hard to match. And now that he could afford to pay them properly and provide good working conditions, everyone benefited. One of his new hires was a 78-year-old woman named Betty, who'd been struggling to make ends meet on her pension. On her first day, she'd broken down crying when Mr. Chen explained the wages and benefits. "I thought nobody wanted us anymore," she'd said. "I thought we were just invisible." "You're not invisible," Mr. Chen had told her. "Not here. Not anymore." Keanu, for his part, tried to stay out of the spotlight as much as possible. He'd never wanted this to be about him. But his phone still rang constantly with interview requests, with invitations to speak at events, with people wanting to honor him for what he'd done. He accepted a few, the ones that would shine more light on the issue rather than on himself. He spoke at a charity gala for elderly care, helped raise millions of dollars. He visited senior centers and retirement communities, spending time with elderly people and listening to their stories. He used his platform to keep the conversation going, to make sure people didn't forget about this issue once the viral moment faded. But the most meaningful moment came when he visited Dolores at her apartment one afternoon. He'd brought lunch, and they sat together at her small kitchen table, eating and talking like old friends. "You changed my life," Dolores told him. "Not for the first time. We changed each other's lives," Keanu corrected. "You reminded me why any of this matters. The fame, the money, the platform, it's all meaningless unless you use it to help people. You gave me purpose." Dolores smiled, that same warm smile he'd first seen in the diner. "I've been thinking about my Henry lately," she said. "My late husband, he always told me that every person we meet teaches us something if we're paying attention. I think about what I've learned through all of this." "What have you learned?" Keanu asked. "That it's okay to accept help. That needing help doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best ones if we're brave enough to keep going." She paused, looking around her bright, safe apartment. "I never thought I'd feel peace again. But I do now. Real peace." Her son had visited 3 more times since that first trip. They talked on the phone every week. Her grandchildren sent her drawings and letters. She'd even started taking a painting class at the senior center near her apartment, something she'd always wanted to do but never had time for. "I'm living," she said to Keanu. "Really living, not just existing. And I'm helping others do the same. That's everything I could have hoped for." The ripple effects continued in ways both big and small. A year after the video went viral, a major study was released showing how communities that had implemented elderly support programs saw improvements not just for seniors, but for everyone. Crime rates dropped in neighborhoods where seniors felt safe and supported. Young people in mentorship programs with elderly community members showed better academic performance and life outcomes. Local businesses thrived when elderly customers had the resources to shop regularly. It turned out that taking care of elderly people wasn't just morally right, it was good for society as a whole. Economists called it the Dolores effect, the way that supporting the most vulnerable members of society, created positive change that benefited everyone. Congress eventually passed new legislation, the Senior Dignity Act, that expanded benefits for elderly Americans, made prescription drugs more affordable, and created grant programs for communities that wanted to establish elderly support networks. It wasn't perfect and it didn't solve everything, but it was a start. And when the bill was signed into law, Dolores was invited to attend the ceremony. She stood there in a new dress her son had bought her, watching as the president signed the legislation that would help millions of people like her. When it was done, the president approached her personally. "This wouldn't have happened without you," he told her. "Your courage in sharing your story, in becoming an advocate, you've changed this country." Dolores thought about that moment later, sitting in her comfortable apartment, looking at the framed photo of her late husband on the shelf. She thought about how close she'd come to giving up, to just accepting that her life would end in exhaustion and fear. She thought about that morning when a kind stranger walked into the diner and really saw her. Not just another old waitress, but a person with dignity and worth. And she thought about all the letters she'd received over the past year. Thousands of them, from elderly people who'd been helped by the programs and initiatives that had sprung up, from young people who'd learned to see and value the seniors in their communities, from families who'd reconnected with elderly relatives they'd lost touch with. Each letter was a life touched, a person helped, a moment of kindness passed forward. And it had all started with one simple act: someone noticing, someone caring, someone deciding that one person's suffering mattered enough to do something about it. Keanu visited her one last time before he left for a film shoot overseas. They sat on her small balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you ever regret it?" Dolores asked him. "Everything that came after? The attention, the pressure to keep advocating for this cause?" Keanu shook his head. "Never, not for a second. You know what I regret? All the times I drove past that diner before and didn't stop. All the people I might have walked past without really seeing them. But I can't change the past. I can only try to do better going forward." "That's all any of us can do," Dolores agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two people who'd been brought together by chance and changed each other's lives in ways neither could have predicted. The story of Keanu and Dolores became more than just a viral moment. It became a reminder of what's possible when compassion meets action. It proved that one person really can make a difference, and that difference can spark changes that reach far beyond what anyone imagined. Years later, when people talked about this moment, they wouldn't just remember the video or the tears or the money. They'd remember what came after: the movement, the changes, the countless lives improved because two people reminded the world that everyone deserves dignity, regardless of age. And somewhere in a bright apartment in a safe neighborhood, a 90-something-year-old woman who'd once worked herself to exhaustion just to survive was finally, truly at peace. She spent her days painting, talking to her grandchildren, advocating for others, and living the life she'd always deserved. That, in the end, was the real story. Not about fame or viral videos or even grand gestures of generosity. It was about recognizing the humanity in others and having the courage to act on that recognition. It was about a world that learned to see its elderly not as burdens, but as treasures worth protecting. And it all started because someone walked into a diner, saw a 90-year-old woman struggling, and decided that her life mattered. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything.